Hello and thank you for joining me. There are a number of things I want to talk about in this video, a number of important themes that are all interrelated, but all important. Themes around knowledge, themes around secularism, themes around the threat that we face from Pan-Islamist ideology. It may be that some of the things I'm talking about here I've mentioned in previous videos, but what I want to do is amalgamate them into one video because this is so important to discuss. So by putting it in this one video, then people can share this around freely and so on. I also want to talk about the regressive left, not the left. And I want to be very clear about this. I'm not really interested in getting into the whole left-right arguments. So I do think that the left is not quite the same as regressive left, because there are left-leaning people who would agree with the things I'm going to say. I also believe there's such a thing as the regressive right. Um, Although it's less obvious, I do think it also exists. But, you know, in the UK, we're having real issues in our society with Pan-Islamism. And it's a mistake to assume that this is just through the spectrum of terrorist incidents. Because if you look at it through just that medium, then it's very easy to say, oh, it's not a big problem. Because each of these cases, whilst terrible, there's always the argument, oh, well, more people die in car crashes, more people die from lung cancer. It is factually true. A lot more people die in road accidents than from terrorism. That's obvious. So there will be some who are tempted to think that it's being blown out of proportion. I don't think it is, because I think the problem that we are facing isn't just about terrorist attacks. It is about a question of values. And for those of us who identify with the political centre, who believe in secularism, who detest Islamism, but don't necessarily want to endorse some of the uglier aspects of blood and soil nationalism, it's not a very easy time, because it isn't that easy to know what exact approach is best. I am convinced that honesty is one of the most important aspects of this. That's why I am determined to stand up for anyone who is simply stating facts. I think that the reason some on the left take such an issue with people like Tommy Robinson is that they have a memory that goes back. They think of the rise of neo-national scripts in the 70s and the 80s. They think of pseudo-Nazi skinheads, the National Front and so on, who were basically racist thugs. There's no question about it. But they've never really digressed from the mindset that because someone's a minority, that they always must be the victims. Therefore, because Muslims are a minority in the UK, if someone criticizes Islam, which is obviously the religion, the automatic assumption is, oh, well, you're a racist, you're a bigot, because you're attacking a minority group. But this utterly fails to recognize the fact that in Islamic theocracies, not only is that the dominating feature, and the sort of persecution that goes on in Islamic theocracies is a world of difference from any discrimination that Muslims face here. I just bit my tongue. I don't. I'm not one of these people that says there is no discrimination of Muslims, or well, there's no hatred of Muslims. I don't think there's any discrimination, but there is anti-Muslim hatred out there. But the way to deal with this is not by trying to silence criticism of Islam. I think part of the problem is there are some people on the populist right who don't exactly help matters. So let's be honest, there are people that go on the forums and say, after a big terrorist attack, deport all Muslims are scum, all Muslims are etc. etc. Those are hateful and unhelpful rants because all it's doing is attacking all Muslims. I do understand the argument that this can get into whataboutery, that is, not all Muslims are this. It can distract from the main issue, which is the threat from Pan-Islamism. But it is important to say that because it's true. Um, what I think we need to do as secularists, as reasonable people who just want knowledge, who just want to know the right progressive, and I mean genuinely progressive, not the way it's sometimes used nowadays, way forward. For me, it's not about saying that all Muslims are the problem, it's about working with genuinely secular Muslim groups. One example is British Muslims for Secular Democracy. This is a group that I've been involved in terms of contribution for about 9 years now. I'm not a Muslim myself, as I would have thought is obvious, but I support that group because they robustly promote secularism, secular values, Western liberal values, and they're staunchly critical of Islamism, and they are also critical of anti-Muslim bigotry. I think a group like this is absolutely essential. I think it's far more important than the likes of the Muslim Council of Britain, which, as far as I'm concerned, is really just a polite front of Islamism. I don't think the Muslim Council for Britain, I don't think the government should be getting that cozy with a group that allegedly has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And at the very least, is a polite face of Islamism. You know, their trustees are well spoken. They will never, they're skilled enough to know what they're, to never say, for example, oh, we believe in stoning in the street. But when you look a little bit deeper at some of these so-called community leaders, you start to see what they really believe in. Because the threat from Islamism isn't about condemning terrorism. I've made this point before. Anybody can condemn terrorism. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. The real question is, what is this person's views on apostasy? What is this person's views on blasphemy? And if their answer to that is that blasphemers should be punished and that apostates should be harassed, then as far as I'm concerned, they should not be in a secular democracy. They should go to some Islamic theocracy where they'll clearly be happy. I do not believe that there is any moral equilibrium between unfortunate hate crime incidents that do occur against Muslims in countries like Canada and the UK and the United States and other countries. There's no comparison between that and the endemic persecution of minorities in Islamic states. Because when crimes against Muslims happen, I'll give an example. When the mosque in Quebec City was attacked, there was widespread condemnation. The Canadian Parliament debated it. They treated it as a terrorist incident, as they should have done. The same thing happened in the UK with the Finsbury Mosque attack. And when there have been individual hate crimes against Muslims, they've been treated seriously, and they should be. Any cases where they're not treated seriously, I would condemn that and suggest that the IPCC should get involved. I am not going to say the situation is absolutely perfect, but closet Islamists often try to peddle this victimhood narrative. This is how we're treated. It's because we're Muslims. What I find so obnoxious about this ideology is that if you look at what goes on in Islamic countries, the sheer scale of human rights abuses, the, the virtually utter accountability in terms of having a scope for freedom of expression, it's just not there. And in all these countries, you get liberal, secular minded people. So this is not about demonizing entire nationalities. I don't believe every Iranian person or Egyptian person, etc., are bad people. Far from it. I believe there's many brave secularists in those societies who know that there's a problem, and in some cases, they're risking their lives to do something about it. But in a world where a young man can be beaten to death, not by the Taliban, not by a terrorist organization, but by fellow students, for no other reason than he described himself as a humanist. I'm referring to the Mashal Khan case in Pakistan earlier this year. What I find utterly galling is that there are people in Western countries, and I'm not just talking about closet Islamists, I'm talking about people who consider themselves liberals, who actually want to close down debate on this. You also get people who are hypocrites. And what I found so abhorrent about Good Morning Britain the other day when Piers Morgan interviewed Tommy Robinson was the utter rank hypocrisy of Morgan. For him to one day criticize an Islamic hate preacher and then attack Tommy Robinson, and it wasn't, he wasn't attacking Tommy Robinson on his approach even. He was attacking him for offending Islam. Piers Morgan, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you. This was a cowardly and frankly despicable piece of populism that Morgan got into by doing that. And like I said in the previous video, if he had a genuine reservation about Tommy Robinson, then why invite him on the show? You know, they're not obliged to invite him on the show. So why did they do it? It stinks of a setup. And it isn't a case that I think that he has to agree with everything Tommy Robinson says. But the hypocrisy of Piers Morgan is stinking, quite honestly, particularly as he is in an influential and powerful position as one of our best known TV presenters. What I find disturbing is less Islamist ideology and more the utter naivety of the regressive left. Because when people talk about Islamism, when they talk about Islamic hate preachers, when they talk about this poisonous ideology, or even when they criticize Islam as a religion, which I believe is entirely legitimate, what I find disturbing is that the first reaction to that isn't to just get involved in adult debate. It is immediately to denounce a person as a bigot, as a racist, etc. Now, there are anti Muslim bigots out there. And yes, some of them are racist because they are focusing on a particular ethnic issue. I know Islam's not a race, but there are situations which are unquestionably racist. And I think it's a mistake for some on the right to downplay that because there is that mentality. Now, those of us who believe in this fight, those of us who believe in secularism, must also be careful not to endorse blood and soil nationalism. I have no respect for it, I have no time for it. I believe all that does is get in the way. All it does is polarize decent Muslims who know that there's a problem and want to do something about this. Now, there will be people who say there's no such thing as a moderate Muslim. I disagree because I have known such people, people who identify as Muslims but recognize the existence of Pan-Islamism. I do think it is possible for a reform movement within Islam. I do believe it is possible for an Islamic Martin Luther. And I think this idea has to be seriously discussed. Islam's a major world religion of 1.5 billion people, so clearly it simply isn't practical to say Islam is a problem, let's ban Islam. It isn't practical. Rather, what is practical is to be honest about the threat from Pan-Islamism, and yes, be honest about intolerant aspects of the Quran. Because Pan-Islamists don't act out of nothing. I think there is an influence there, and it's just pure naive to say that none of this comes from Quranic teachings. Of course, so what's our battery argument is, oh, we'll look at Old Testament passages. Frankly, that's irrelevant. Yes, you get Christian extremists, you get Christian fundamentalists in parts of the United States, certainly in parts of Africa. Um, and some of them are, yeah, they are extremists, and they are capable of doing extreme things. And you get Hindu extremism within India, you get Buddhist extremism within Southeast Asia. So, yes, every religion has its extremists, but the pan-Islamist nature is something unique. I don't think that you get the same sort of politicization, at least on a global scale, in the other religions. You get the extremists, but you don't get that pan political aspect to it. What Islamism really is Islamic supremacy. This is an ideology that sees non-Muslims as dogs, as worthless. This is a supremacist mentality. So the regressive left, I think it is a very appropriate term because people who pertain to be for equality, people who pertain to be about progressive ideas, who pertain to be about gay rights, all these issues, this is fundamentally contradictory to Islamic theocracy. So I find it so despicable that they want to shut down debate by using inflammatory terms like racism. By all means, where there are actual racist rants. So let's say, for example, you get someone saying, I hate all Muslims, they're all insane. It's legitimate to criticize that. But if someone is saying, as Tommy Robinson was doing, holding up the Quran and saying this book has hateful passages, it doesn't matter if it's a major world religion. Religion should not have special protection from criticism any more than socialism or conservatism or any political ideology that people hold dear. Yes, many people hold the faith dear, but quite frankly, if your response to someone criticizing your faith is to threaten violence or try to censor them, you've got a problem. If you disagree with Tommy Robinson, criticize him, debate his ideas. But what I find so despicable about what Piers Morgan was doing, I mean, they know his record, they know he's outspoken on these things, so why invite him on the show? I believe fundamentally that we must have a situation where religion can openly be criticized. If Tommy Robinson was coming on the show and saying we need to deport all Muslims, they're all a problem, I could understand the criticism because that would be inflammatory and it would be unhelpful. But he was criticizing Islam. Failure to understand this difference will help no one. But this goes well beyond Tommy Robinson. I saw a video actually, a guy called Saad Gado, I believe. I don't know much about the guy. He's from the Middle East. And he raised some thought provoking issues regarding ostrich mentality. And as he put it, this is when something is abundantly obvious, but it's a case of putting your head in the sand. And that is precisely what Piers Morgan was doing. So he had a long, interesting interview with Tommy Robinson. I didn't watch all of it, but I caught bits of it, and it was interesting. Very often, some of the strongest critics of Islamism will be people who have fled the Middle East, refugees, often Christians or ex-Muslims, etc. And what they often find shocking is the apathy and the downright appeasement the regressive left often show on this issue. Someone said, I can't remember who made this quote, but something along the lines of the problem is not about Islamism itself, it is when the left and Islam get together. That is the real danger. And the thing about this is it's become so ridiculously polarizing that if you have views like mine, you're automatically seen as right wing. I don't even consider myself that right wing. There's a lot of issues people would describe me as a lefty. And I find it so sad and so unfortunate that so many people, and these are sometimes people in quite powerful, influential positions, are so astonishingly naive when it comes to this issue. And what I would simply say to those who are saying, oh, but Nathan, what about hate crimes against individual Muslims? I don't know how many times I have to condemn it and acknowledge that it is a problem. But none of that changes the fact that you cannot say a religion is above criticism. Pan-Islamism is part of Islam. And we need to get sensible about this. The answer is not about angry protests outside mosques and waving pigs' heads around and putting bacon on mosque doors. That's stupid, it's inflammatory, and it's polarizing. It won't help anyone. And that's why I don't endorse the likes of Britain First and so on. Because frankly, they have members who simply bring their movements into major discredit. That's why I don't endorse those movements, because I don't think they are particularly helpful. Yes, they are saying some things which are factually true. I just don't agree with their approaches. But intellectually, we have to be honest about this. And some things have changed. There are some senior politicians who now are openly saying Islamism, and that is a good thing. So that is a slight improvement from 10 years ago. So, for example, the Prime Minister isn't afraid to say Islamist terrorism, Islamist ideology. 10 years ago, that would have been seen as bigotry. Nevertheless, we still have a very long way to go in terms of really, really being honest about this. And we have to look at some certain radical steps. I believe, for example, the mosques who are harboring hate preachers need to be given an ultimatum. Either you expel these people or you get closed down. I do believe that in parts of London there and parts of Birmingham, there are mosques that have a lot to answer for. And we have to be very, very careful about this, not to let this go unnoticed. Because as soon as it starts festering, look at what happened in Molenbeek, the Brussels suburb where this mentality was festering away. What happened? Brussels has now had 5 terrorist attacks. There was a big one last year, but there's been smaller incidents. Um, that's what happens when you don't have integration. That's what happens when you do not say our values have to be respected. They have to be clearly defined. I believe secularism has to be one of them. And secularism isn't about saying religious people can't have a view. It's not about saying Muslims can't have an opinion. It's about insisting that religious dogma is not forced onto the rest of us. And that includes Christian religious dogma as well. So I believe these issues are so, so important. We're now in the year 2017. We're well into the 21st century. It's insane that we're dealing with a mindset that belongs in the 14th century. It's scary, but we have to fight this. We have to be honest about it. I believe the way to go is firstly by staunchly defending criticism of religion, staunchly defending the right to do that. People have a right to rebut it. But the principle of criticizing religion has to be defended. Secondly, the answer is not attacking all Muslims. And yes, some people do that. It's not the answer. All it does is polarize Muslims who do want to help, who recognize there's a problem, and they want to be part of the solution. It doesn't help them. And it also, frankly, plays into the Islamist narrative. It helps Islamist propaganda. Thirdly, as a society, we have to be honest. We have to be honest. I might be repeating myself, but that's so, so important. Anyway, I'll round this up, but I just can't believe that there is still an atmosphere of dishonesty out there from the regressive left, people who will not accept that there is a problem and who try to make a moral equilibrium. You get a few far right extremists to try and make a moral equilibrium with a highly organized, extremely dangerous, well funded terrorist organization like ISIS. And there's many others. There's simply no comparison. I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching.